We have one more award that we want to present. As I told you, there was so much activity this year and so many people working across this country to do so many important things. And our last recipient tonight, the Family, Faith, and Freedom Award, is Phil Burris. But Phil, why we're recognizing Phil this year with the Family, Faith, and Freedom Award is because Phil spearheaded the marriage amendment in the state of Ohio. Now, if you know what Ohio meant to the election of our current president, then you should know what marriage meant to that election. Marriage was the driving force. When none of the political leadership on that stage, you had the governor, you had the two senators.
As I sat there and hearing Tony's words and knowing that I was going to receive such an awesome award, I knew that there was tens of thousands, literally hundreds of thousands of people that without their help, this award would not have been possible. So I wanted to thank God, and I wanted to take this opportunity to thank those people who made this award possible.
That sequence of events really began way back in the 1990s when Phil brought together a team of pro-family leaders to address a same-sex marriage threat in Hawaii. But a more recent date that might be said to have begun the chain of events that would lead directly to Ohio's Issue 1 campaign would be February 4th, 2004, the day that Ohio's Governor Bob Taft signed into law Ohio's Defense of Marriage Act, or DOMA.
We were so elated when that day finally came. It was somewhat ironic, though. Phil had been the impetus for the original federal DOMA all those years ago, but 37 other states had put in place their Defense of Marriage Act law before Ohio finally got ours. But we also had to work through 3 different sessions of the General Assembly and 2 governors before we were finally able to get the governor to put pen to paper to put DOMA into law in the state of Ohio. What the Federal Defense of Marriage Act said was that the full faith and credit clause of the United States Constitution would not be used against a state in order to try to put in place counterfeit marriages, same-sex marriages, if the state already had in place a strong public policy that would prevent the recognition of those type of unions. We knew that both the federal and state DOMAs were vulnerable to a challenge in the courts. However, at that time, no state had legalized same-sex unions, and so we felt relatively safe. Even with the Massachusetts case pending, we couldn't fathom that it would actually happen.
But it did happen.
We were devastated. We had no idea that this was really going to happen. And then on May 18th, in my office, I called together my staff and the attorneys, and I said, we must do something about this. We must change Ohio's Constitution. And that began the process.
It was inevitable. Eventually, a same-sex couple from Ohio, married in Massachusetts, would return to Ohio and insist that their marriage be recognized in Ohio. When their request was denied, based on the Ohio DOMA, the Human Rights Campaign, the ACLU, and numerous other homosexual activist organizations were prepared to challenge DOMA and take it all the way to the Ohio Supreme Court. The only safeguard was to place the self-evident definition of marriage in the Constitution out of the reach of activist judges.
When Phil first approached me and asked me to draft a constitutional amendment that would define marriage in Ohio, I was both thrilled and yet skeptical. I had spent the first several months of the year in Massachusetts where we suffered one loss after another, and the opportunity to come back to Ohio where we had a chance to get a victory and to get marriage defined within the Ohio Constitution was very exciting. But on the other hand, I am very familiar with how difficult it is to place a constitutional amendment on the ballot, and particularly in such short time, and I told Phil that. I said, you know, I'm confident that we'll have the support we need from Alliance Defense Fund and others, but I just think time right now is our biggest enemy.
When Phil came to me and asked me to be on the committee representing the petitioners, I was more than happy to do that. I knew we needed a constitutional amendment to protect marriage in Ohio, but I must admit I didn't have a lot of faith we could do it. We needed 323,000 signatures by August 3rd. It seemed an impossible task. I was a part of that first conference call when Phil shared with us what needed to be done. He promised that CCV would supply the support, but we needed to go out in our spheres of influence with our members and our friends and get the petition signed. We all got excited about it. We closed with prayer, and in a matter of a few minutes, the Ohio Campaign to Protect Marriage was launched.
I'm the detail person in the organization, the nuts and bolts guy, so to speak. It's up to Robin Burris and me to take the ideas and translate them into realities. And when I began to think about the reality of printing up hundreds of thousands of these petitions and instructions, and then distributing them somehow to all 88 counties, and fielding the inevitable inquiries that I knew would be flooding into our office, and then getting those petitions back in here and processing them and delivering them to the Secretary of State's office, and all that before August 3rd, well, frankly, I was torn. I was torn between what, by practical measures, I considered to be a virtually impossible task, and what God clearly was telling us to do.
In his 22 years with CCV, Phil had developed a reputation as a coalition builder. He was driven by a passion to unite like-minded individuals and like-minded organizations to more effectively accomplish their common goals. Those relationships proved critical to the ensuing campaign.
You know, when my friend Phil Burris of the Citizens for Community Values invited me to help promote a constitutional amendment protecting marriage in Ohio against incredible odds with only 3 months to spare, I said, now that's a battle I can join. So Focus on the Family was privileged to partner with CCV in sending out a petition to 86,000 of our friends in Ohio as part of a Herculean effort to put Issue 1 on the ballot in November.
70% of the signed petitions came into the CCV office during the last 2 weeks prior to the August 3rd deadline. CCV's staff worked with a team of volunteers 10 to 12 hours per day to process 25 to 30,000 signatures per day. On August 1st, the staff and volunteers loaded more than 88 file boxes of petitions in a van and headed to a temporary office at the Potter's House Church in Columbus. 2 days later, deadline day, 2 remaining staffers would pick up the final petitions at the Sharonville post office and process those petitions while they drove to join the others. After a brief press conference at the church, Phil and the staff delivered to the Secretary of State's office slightly more than 400,000 signatures of registered voters, 70,000 more than the required number. But that was just phase 1.